as we go through the session today at the bottom of your screen by posting those there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rishi just to say a few words to start us, and then we're going to get into those questions and answers. Rishi.
Thanks, Mel, and hi everyone. Welcome to this Facebook Live. It's great of you to make some time. I'm on my way over to Norwich for our hustings tonight, and as you know, I've been traveling across our country. It feels like twice round already in the last few weeks, talking to all of you, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity today to take some questions, not just, as Mel said, from members of our party, but also members of the public as well, and hear what you have to say. I've been out making my case for why I believe I'm the right person to lead both our party, but also the country, not just through the challenging months in the immediate future, but onto a brighter future as well. And I firmly believe I'm the right person to do that. I've enjoyed making my case everywhere I go, and now hopefully I'll have a chance to take some of your questions here today. So with that, back to you, Mel, and let's get on with it.
Great, thank you very much, Rishi. First question is from Samuel. Now, he has pointed out that this contest has been pretty feisty in part, and there are many commentators out there saying that it's going to be a huge effort now to bring the Conservative Party back together to unite to win the next general election. What is it that you have to say to those who perhaps haven't voted for you in this contest? How are you going to unite our party and our country?
No, it's a good question, Sam, and feisty was a nice way to put it. But that's because I think everyone involved is passionate about their ideas and their vision for the country, and that's no bad thing. But look, I was really proud in the parliamentary stages of this contest to have topped the ballot at every round. Most support from my colleagues in Parliament, but more importantly than that, actually, was the breadth of that support. It was drawn from all parts of our parliamentary party, because we are a broad church. We're not all robots in the Conservative Party. We're not going to agree on absolutely everything. And what I would do is build on that, demonstrating that I do unify people. I can bring people together and build a team around me in government that reflects all the talents and traditions of our fantastic party. I think that's the best way to start off and show that we are a united team. And this is not about one faction or another. This is about recognizing all the talents that we have and putting our best people forward to serve the British public. And I think that's the right way to do it. But we also need to think about uniting the country. And, you know, my view is, look, lots of people don't wake up every day thinking, well, they're a Conservative or they vote for the Labour Party, right? They are people who want a government that actually just works properly for them. And what I want to do is to run a government where things are conducted competently, where they're conducted seriously, and they're conducted with decency and integrity at the heart of everything that we do. That is the change that I'm going to bring. That's the type of Prime Minister that I want to be, and that is how we're going to bring people together and ultimately make sure that we win the next election.
Okay, thanks, Rishi. Now, a question just popped up, which is an interesting one, actually. Would you invite or consider inviting our Lionesses, our great victors in the European Cup, to number 10 Downing Street if you're the occupant?
Gosh, definitely. Well, that would be fantastic. And I was out on the campaign trail during all of that. And actually, it was amazing talking to people to see how it had really just captured the imagination of our country. And I know that there'll be a phenomenal legacy from their triumph. You know, football pitches, playing fields across the UK inspired by what they achieved for us. And it would be an enormous honour and a privilege to meet them and welcome them to Downing Street if I'm lucky enough to be there.
Okay, thank you. We've got lots, I can see lots and lots of people joining us now, which is fantastic news. Question from Rachel, who is a party member. She does a lot locally, works very hard for the party, often feels that the party is not as inclusive of its membership as it perhaps could be, and wants to know what it is that you might do to strengthen that relationship between the parliamentary party, you as Prime Minister, and the party in the country.
Gosh, you know, it's a great question, Rachel, because we've spent a lot of time in this contest talking about our plans for the country, rightly so, because whoever wins will be Prime Minister. But remember, I'm running to be leader of our party. And that's why I put out something called a contract for members on the fantastic website Conservative Home, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which does a wonderful job for our party. And there are some ideas in there to demonstrate my commitment to all of you, the amazing volunteers, activists, association officers, councillors in our party who do so much to support us. Now, a couple of things in there that you might be interested in. The first is I wanted to actually have an official member survey that we do regularly, which we don't do currently. But not only that, I want the results of that survey to be properly discussed at political cabinet so that you can join this party one week and a couple of weeks later you could be filling out a survey, and then after that your ideas will be being discussed around the cabinet table or in Downing Street. That's how it should work. So that's what I wanted to do, to make sure that your views are valued and heard. But also, when it comes to campaigning, I know how valuable it is to have fully paid campaign managers. And what I've committed to is raising the money we need as a party to put dedicated, fully paid campaign managers in all our target seats. Because I think if we can do that, that's going to support all of our activists on the ground to win where we need to win, to defend what we need to defend, and ensure not only can we win lots of council elections between now and the next general election, that we emerge triumphant at the end of that election. So those are a couple of my commitments to you, but go and have a look at the contract for members on ConHome, as I said, and hopefully you'll like what you see there.
Right. Well, amongst the flood of people coming into this session, it's quite extraordinary. I've noticed a lot of our members of Parliament, which is pleased, including Johnny Mercer. Welcome, Johnny. Glad you've joined us. And I think that means we need a question on defence. We have had one through from Kylie, who is asking, what is it that you're going to do to make sure that this country is safe? We've heard a lot about the amounts that should be spent on our defence and the 2.5, 3%, whatever it may be. What's your view on this? How are you going to make sure we're ready for whatever the threat may be from Russia and China, or wherever it may come from in the years ahead?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So, together with the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister, I oversaw the largest increase in the defence budget since the end of the Cold War. And we did that in the middle of COVID because the threats we were facing as a country were increasing. We needed to make sure that we were adequately prepared for those. And I think the Defence Secretary in particular deserves enormous praise for being so far-sighted and identifying the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and help lead the world in providing support to Ukraine. And Ben deserves enormous credit for that. Now, going forward, of course, I want to make sure that we keep investing in our defence. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it will be 3% of GDP, and that might sound attractive to some people. That's not because I don't believe in increasing defence spending. Of course I do. It's because I don't believe in arbitrary targets when it comes to something as serious as the security of our country. So the commitment I'd make is I'm going to invest whatever it takes to keep you, your families, and our country safe, because that's the first duty of a Prime Minister. Now, a couple of other things I'd say is, look, threats are evolving and they're different. And if you think about some of the other threats we need to protect ourselves against, that's what I'm thinking about as PM, or someone who wants to be PM. And think about this. So as Chancellor, I passed a new law that allows us to stop foreign countries and companies stealing our technology, investing in our companies over here, because that's a new type of threat we faced. And I was glad that we passed a law, and our Prime Minister, I'll use that law to protect ourselves. But also think about this, our supply chains for our critical ingredients that we need to power our economy. We need to learn from the experience in Russia and energy, and make sure that when we think about the things that our economy is going to be reliant on in years to come, particularly things like rare earth minerals that will power all the electric batteries in our electric cars, that we have a supply chain of those things that is from our allies, or ideally from home as well. So that's the kind of farsightedness that I'm bringing to the table when it's thinking about our security. The last thing I'd say, because Mel, you mentioned Johnny was on the call, is to pay tribute to him and the phenomenal work that he does for our veterans. Now, I'm really privileged to be an MP up in North Yorkshire, where I represent Catterick Garrison, our largest army base, but also RAF Leeming. And I do a lot of work, both with our serving personnel and our veterans, and we owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. It's one of the highlights of the job that I have. And I think Johnny deserves enormous credit for making sure that government properly focuses on our veterans. And I was really proud to sign his charter for veterans. And hopefully, if I'm elected as Prime Minister, I would like to implement that to give our veterans the support, the opportunity, and the gratitude that they deserve.
Great, thanks, Rishi, and thanks for your comments about Johnny. I'm proud to have him as a fellow Devon Member of Parliament. Can I just ask you a question from Tom here, who I think quite rightly says that perhaps the biggest challenge of our age now is the cost of living crisis. We've got inflation going up through the roof. We've got the latest suggestions it might go as high as 18% within a matter of a few months. What is your plan for gripping that? And what kind of evidence can you provide us with that shows that you're the person that has that grip, has those ideas to get on top of inflation and the cost of living crisis?
Well, Tom, this is the number one issue of this campaign. And indeed, it's the number one issue facing the country right now. And I've been consistent about my views that inflation is the challenge that the new Prime Minister should be most focused on. Now, my plan is straightforward. I believe inflation has got to be the priority, and we shouldn't be complacent about it, and we need to make sure that we fight it and grip it. And in terms of helping people with the cost of living, I've set out a clear plan to provide support over the autumn and winter to those who need help. Now, there will be some help for everybody, most notably by cutting VAT off energy bills, which is something we can do relatively quickly. But there are two other groups of people that I want to provide extra direct assistance to. That's those on the lowest incomes, about a third of all households, but also pensioners. Now, those two groups of people face particular pressures this winter, and I think it's right that we step in to provide them with extra financial help. I announced quite a bit as Chancellor, but the situation has deteriorated since then, and I'd go further as Prime Minister to make sure that those people do not face the risk of destitution this winter. That wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be moral, and it's not what a compassionate Conservative government that I am privileged to lead would ever let happen. And you asked also about my track record. Well, when I made those announcements as Chancellor, you can look at the coverage at the time, and I think it was reasonably universal in acknowledging that the support I announced then was very well targeted, particularly at helping the most vulnerable in our society, and was commensurate with the scale of the challenge that we understood it to be back then. And that's how I would continue to act as Prime Minister going forward. But more broadly, I think probably the most time everyone here watching today or listening probably saw me was in that first COVID press conference, right? That's when I kind of popped up on your TV screens, and there was a time of enormous anxiety for our country about what was going to happen when we were going to go into a lockdown. And I was the person who I believe successfully helped safeguard our economy through that storm and protected jobs and families and businesses successfully. And that's what I did. And you saw me do it. And you probably didn't know what the word furlough meant back then, right? I mean, who did? But that's what I did. So you've seen me in action. So hopefully you know that I've got the ability and the experience needed to grapple with these big economic challenges, but ultimately deliver solutions that work and make a difference to people, and that focus on the people that most need our help, because those are my values, and that's what I think a government should be doing.
Okay, thanks, Rishi. So Russell asks a Brexit question. I think we can assume from this he is a Remainer, or was a Remainer. He says that Brexit is doing immeasurable damage to our country, that it should be reversed. He also makes an interesting observation, which is that the trade intensity of the UK economy has diminished over the recent period, and some say this is due to Brexit. So how are we going to make Brexit really, really work for us? And how are we going to make sure that our trade stands up as a trading nation in the years to come?
Well, look, obviously Brexit was an issue that was fiercely debated, but the reality is we had a very clear democratic process that we have to respect, and we've got to just move on from that now, right? And actually, we've got to stop referring to people as Brexiteers and Remainers in that way, right? Because ultimately, we're all Brits, and we just want to make a success for our country now. So how can we do that, though? How can we tangibly demonstrate to everybody that there are upsides from all of this? Well, I think, look, there are things that we need to do. Now, as I came up with an idea when I was a backbench MP, it was an idea for something called free ports. And these are zones that we can create, economic zones, which come with certain preferential benefits, which attract jobs and investment. And we couldn't do them very well inside the EU. And now that we're outside of the EU, we can. And as Chancellor, I was delighted to actually implement that policy. And we've put them in places like Teesside, Merseyside, Humberside, in the Thames, and in Southampton, where I'm from. And they are working. So businesses are investing, jobs are being created in areas of our country that really need it. So that's a good example of a tangible success from Brexit. Another thing we need to do is our regulations. Now, I have a background in business and in technology and innovation, and I passionately believe that if we can have the most innovative economy in the world, then we'll have an economy where lots of jobs are being created and people are paid really well, and our citizens are getting healthier and happier as a result. Now, we can do lots in our regulations to make that a reality now that we're outside of the EU. So whether it comes to how we look at agricultural technology, whether it comes to financial services and what's going on in blockchain, whether it's around AI or life sciences to speed drugs through the discovery process, through trials, as we saw with the vaccines. There's all this opportunity out there for us to do things differently in a way that will mean that our economy becomes more innovative and more dynamic. And then the last thing, because you mentioned trade intensity, and you're right about that, I think it's unclear how much of that decline in trade intensity is down to the after effects of the pandemic and a focus on resilience and supply chains, or it's resulted to some of our changing trade patterns as a result of leaving the EU. But look, the key thing now is we have the ability to sign new free trade deals with every country around the world, right? That's a new power that we have, and we've been acting on it as a government. It's something that my colleague Liz did when she was trade secretary. And there's lots more countries out there that we can seek to deepen our trade relationships with. That can be really good for British businesses that are exporting to those markets. And it's one of the big tangible benefits of Brexit as well. So look, there's lots in there that we can deliver. But what I do agree with is we've got to double down on it, and we've got to have it inject some new urgency into that now we're through the pandemic, and find all those opportunities and actually deliver them. That's what I would do as Prime Minister.
Okay, thank you. Frank, very simple, direct question. How and when are you going to get taxes down?
Frank, as soon as possible is my quick answer. Now, that requires us to do a couple of things, right? It requires us to be disciplined on public spending, right? Because that, if we're not, then we can't. Because I firmly believe, as I'm sure most people do, right? They believe in basic housekeeping, right? We've got to pay for the things that we're spending money on. And the biggest thing that we spend money on is the NHS. And that's why, look, I really believe in the NHS. I come from an NHS family. But we've got to look at reforming the NHS and making it more efficient. Because if we don't do that, it's going to be really hard to cut your taxes and everyone else's. And I've got some ideas about how we can think differently about the NHS. For example, tackling this issue of people missing their appointments, which wastes everyone's time and costs money, changing how we do elective surgery, for example. So look, there's lots of things we need to do to reform public services. But then we also need to just keep growing our economy. And this autumn, I want to radically change how we tax businesses in this country to support those businesses that are actually delivering growth, the businesses that are investing, the businesses that are conducting R&D and innovating to create the products and services of the future. Those are the tax cuts that will actually drive up growth. That's what my plan is about. It's based on all my years in business, and I'm confident that it will work. And if we get those two things right, grow the economy, be tough on public spending, then absolutely we can responsibly cut taxes, starting with income tax, because I really believe in hard work, and I believe in making sure that people's hard work is always rewarded. And the best way to do that is to try and keep income tax as low as possible. And I've got a plan to cut income tax, and that's what I will deliver for you as Prime Minister.
Great, thank you, Rishi. Janet asked, well, she was asking about the NHS, but I think you've answered much of that, but also about social care. Particularly with aging population, the increasing costs of that kind of care, huge burden, shortages of staff in that sector, big challenge. How are you going to address that?
Yeah, well, Janet, look, I saw this firsthand because I used to be the minister in charge of local councils, and the pressure that our councils were under when it came to social care was significant. Plus, we saw what happened with social care during the pandemic, and I don't think any of us want to see that repeated. And that's why I did something really difficult as Chancellor, right? I introduced a new way to get funding, not just for the NHS, but specifically for social care, which for too long has felt like the poor cousin of the NHS. And that new funding that's going in is ring-fenced specifically for social care, so that should really help. So I think people can trust me and trust that the NHS and social care is safe in my hands and that I care about it. But we do need to, as I said, reform it. So that means actually investing in our social care workforce in a way that we've not done before. That's what some of that money is going to do, because I want everyone working in social care to feel valued, to feel like they've got training, proper qualifications, a sense of career progression. And if we can get that right, then we'll have far fewer people leaving the sector. That will be really good. It will save money and improve the quality of the care we get. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing we need to do is improve the working between our local councils and the NHS, because I think we all know that there's lots of people sitting in NHS hospitals that shouldn't really be there, and that's clogging up the system. And we need to make it easier for them to move into into social care settings. So that means empowering our councils, changing how we do the budgets and the management at a local level, but also thinking about what we used to call kind of convalescent hospitals. The types of places where people could go rather than be in an acute hospital. We used to have those and they worked really well, and we probably need to look at doing more of that again. So those are just some of those ideas in social care. But I think the main thing I'd say is, look, I did a difficult thing as Chancellor to support social care and the NHS. So you can be confident that it's safe in my hands, but you can also be confident that I'm going to go and do the reform that's required to get the best possible care for all of us and make sure that we can also keep everyone's taxes as low as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mark wants to have some answers on the migration crisis. Recently, over 1,000 typically highly vulnerable people coming to our shores. How are you going to get on top of that? Because it seems to be something that has eluded government for way too long now.
Yeah, Mark, I agree with you that it's a major problem that needs tackling. And at the beginning of this campaign, I talked about some emergencies. It's the word I used to describe some of the things that the new Prime Minister would have to grapple with. And I talked about the NHS, but I also talked about illegal migration. Now, look, I'm sitting here talking to all of you as a product of our country's unbelievably proud and compassionate history in welcoming people to our shores. But I think we can all agree that that has to be done legally, has to be done fairly. And when it's not, and when we turn on our TV screens and see what's happening and people coming in small boats, it undermines trust in the system. Now, I've set out a really detailed 10-point plan to try and finally grip this situation. So if you've got time, go and have a look at it on my website. I'll give you a couple of things that are in there because it is going to require radicalism to grapple with it. One thing I want to do is move away from the European definition of asylum because it's too broad and exploited by lots of people and means that we can't send people back who shouldn't really be here. So that's something I really want to do and it will help. But I also want to think about our foreign policy differently and toughen it up a bit because, if we're going to go to a country and talk about a trade deal or indeed be giving that country some of our overseas aid money, I think it is entirely reasonable to say to them at the same time, hang on, you do need to take back your failed asylum seekers from our country. I think that's an entirely reasonable thing to do, but it will require us to do things differently. So those are just a couple of ideas, but I do agree with you. We've got to grip this problem. I will do whatever it takes to make our policies work, to secure our borders, because I want people to have trust in our migration system. So it means that when we do need to open our hearts and our land to people from Ukraine or Afghanistan or Syria or Hong Kong, that will always be possible. And I think that in order to make sure that's possible, people need to have faith in the system, and they are losing that faith at the moment. But as Prime Minister, I will fix it and restore it.
Amy asks, how are you going to help students, particularly with cost of living pressures? And she asks, is it fair that students are being asked to pay such a high rate of interest on their student loans?
So Amy, I know it's difficult, and on student loans, one of the last things I did as Chancellor was change the interest rate that people pay on their loans, people like you and many others, so that people never end up paying back more than they actually borrowed. So that reduced the interest rate. And we also I put in place a freeze on tuition fees for the next few years. And those two things together, I think from memory, will reduce or save people about £11,000, just to give you a sense of the scale of those changes. So hopefully that will be helpful. But I think more broadly, what I'd say is, what I also want to do is make sure that young people have lots of different routes to having the career and job of their dreams. And that means doing a lot more with apprenticeships. And I think now you really can do almost anything you could imagine through an apprenticeship, which obviously is quicker and a lot cheaper than going to university. And I think, Microsoft, one of the biggest providers of apprenticeships in the UK, and apprenticeships in data and in cloud, all sorts of things. I met someone the other day who was doing a degree level apprenticeship in accounting and was loving it. And so I think, look, we need to have an education system which is not just about university, but actually has all these other amazing routes into these careers for young people. And that's the type of education system that I want to deliver. And I think it can work out much better for lots of people, especially given the tuition fees that, Amy, you're talking about. So hopefully lots of people will have other opportunities as well to provide them with the jobs of their dreams. And that, again, is something that I would want to deliver as Prime Minister.
Thanks, Rishi. Vineet is very worried about NHS dentistry. She points out that it's extraordinarily difficult for many people actually to even access NHS dentistry locally. What are you going to do to meet that challenge?
Yeah, it's one of the things that, as I've been around the country twice, as I said, it's definitely one of the things that I've picked up has just become a really difficult issue in lots of parts of our country, sadly. And so look, there's a couple of things that I've said that I want to do. One is to have a look at our dentistry contract, which lots of people have raised with me, and the way that that works. Maybe there are things that we need to look at differently in that. I think another thing, I want to make sure that the money that we put into the NHS for dentistry does actually find its way to dentistry, and it's meant to be kept for dentistry, but it's not obvious to many people that that actually happens. So I want to go and check that that is happening, and that's the kind of slight challenge we saw with social care, right? And social care needs funding, and I think we find the NHS has a lot of money, but it doesn't always find its way to these other areas that also need the resourcing and the funding. So I'd like to go and check that the money that we have set aside for dentistry does actually make it to all the dentists and the people who need dental care as well.
Great. Yeah, I'm getting all sorts of sort of slightly personal, not in a nasty way, but quite interesting personal questions, which actually look a bit of fun. So I've jotted some of those down. So I'm going to come to those in a moment. So if you're listening, do hang on to those because it might be quite entertaining, if nothing else.
Oh gosh,
can we ask?
I'm already nervous.
Who have I got? You're already nervous. Quite. You should be. Okay. Gavin is asking about mental health, Rishi. He's very concerned about mental health provision across the country and wants to know, if you were Prime Minister, what would you be doing in that area?
Yeah, one of my colleagues, Jeremy Hunt, when he was Health Secretary, did a really good job of putting mental health on a kind of equal footing with everything else and giving it the proper attention that it deserves within the NHS and more broadly. And so I think Jeremy deserves enormous praise for getting the ball rolling in that side of things. Now, there's obviously more we have to do. We now do have a good chunk of budget for the NHS allocated to mental health, but I think there are things we can do, like making sure that young people in particular have access to mental health professionals, whether it's in educational settings or elsewhere. I think that could be something that we focus on. And another thing I want to grapple, and I say this as a parent of two young girls, one thing that alarms me is the rise in mental health difficulties, particularly for young and teenage girls, caused by what's happening online. And I'm sure they're kind of concerned parents probably watching, similar to me. And things that we obviously wouldn't allow to happen in the physical world, so to speak, are happening online, and that's not right. And it's having a huge impact on our kids' mental health. So we need to get on and pass a law called the Online Safety Bill, which will make it clear what is not allowed and make sure that our large digital companies have a proper obligation to stop that from happening. Because I think we all care about the health and well-being of our youngsters, and this is something that is clearly causing problems, and we need to take action to prevent it from getting worse. And that's what I would do, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a concerned dad.
Okay, thank you. Well, Rishi, you mentioned earlier when you were Chancellor bringing the furlough scheme, and you did indeed very successfully keep unemployment extremely low when many thought that it would spiral off into many millions of people out of work. But of course, that has left us with a very tight labour market now. And Adekimi is asking, those on benefits, how do we encourage those that are on benefits who are able to go back into the workplace where they're really desperately needed? How do we encourage that to happen? What would you do differently to what we're doing at the moment?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, because if you talk to any business at the moment, other than energy bills, if you ask them what's the biggest challenge they face, they would all probably tell you it's access to workers, is actually just getting the staff they need to support their business and grow their business. And, I tell you this, not so long ago when I was Chancellor, I was going over the numbers, it looked like we had more people claiming unemployment benefit in this country than there were job vacancies in the economy. And I think that's a quite striking statistic that doesn't feel quite right, does it? So look, I do think we need to look at our welfare system and look at reforming it to support people off welfare into work. because like, generally lots of people are working really hard paying their taxes. And if there are jobs to be done, if there are hours available, I think it's completely reasonable for people who are claiming unemployment benefit to do those jobs and to take those hours. I think that is an entirely sensible thing to do. And we should support them to do it because it's really good for them. I'm a big believer that there's something incredibly dignifying about work. There's nobility in work and for what it does for you, your sense of purpose and confidence, and for your family. So it's really good for the individual and their family to be in work. So we shouldn't be shy about being very pro work and supporting people into work and not making it easy for them not to be in work. But we also recognize that that's good for the taxpayer, obviously, because it saves everyone money. And there was a question before from, I think, Frank about getting people's taxes down. That will help us do that. But also it's good for the economy because it is causing inflationary pressures and holding our economic growth back. So it will help us deal with that as well if we can move more people into the labour market. That's why it's so important. And I think it's a very conservative thing to do. And it's something that I would like to do as Prime Minister.
Just had a question in from Charles. It's back to foreign policy quickly. He points out that yesterday the Ukraine marked its Independence Day under extremely difficult circumstances. And he's really seeking an assurance from you that you will make Ukraine and the Ukraine-Russia conflict equally as high a priority, as he puts it, as Boris Johnson's government. Is that something that you can commit to?
Yes, and I think Boris deserves enormous credit for the way that he actually helped lead the global response to that crisis, and something I think all of us feel proud of the role that we as a country collectively have played in supporting Ukraine. And as I talked about Ben Wallace earlier, the Defence Secretary, I think the first person to recognise that Ukraine needed support with arms, and then galvanise lots of other countries to follow our lead. So and the way that we've opened up our hearts and homes to people from Ukraine has been inspiring. So yes, of course I'll carry on with all of that. Look, ultimately we need to keep supporting Ukraine. That means financially and militarily, with arms and with training, and we need to continue weakening Russia. You think about how are we doing that? Well, we're doing that primarily through economic sanctions, which I helped design and implement as Chancellor. I worked with my colleagues around the world, other finance ministers, to put in place a set of sanctions which targeted the Russian economy to make it more difficult to fund their war efforts. And we need to continue doing that. And that's what I would do as Prime Minister, not least because we need to make sure that Ukraine can prevail and end that conflict on terms which are acceptable to them, but not empower Russia to think that they can do things like this, and also send a signal to other aggressors around the world that this kind of behavior will not go unpunished and not met with a very strong response. So it's in our interest to make sure that we stay the course here.
Great. And can I say hello to Isabel, Joanne, Janet, who've just joined, Harry, Frank, Margaret. We forgot Gareth Davis, a fine colleague of ours, has also joined the session, I'm told, along with Eileen and Roger. So you're all very welcome. Now, I'm going to come to the less serious. Now,
you said it sounded like one of my Peloton classes where they were shouting out to all the people in the class. So
yeah, probably just as stressful, I should think. Okay, so we're going to come. Yeah, we're going to come now to these sort of more sort of informal questions, I suppose you call them, which I've been noting down as you've been explaining the answers to the other questions. So I'm just going to put some of those to you to finish off. So the first one is you're often referred to as Dishy Rishi. What does your wife think about that? Is there any jealousy? Any jealousy in the family or anything?
No, definitely no jealousy. There is, I think, a kind of mild bemusement. It's probably the most charitable way to describe it, and then a comment about my proclivity to focus on the dishwasher more than anything else when it comes to the household chores, which I've spoken about in the past more than anything else. But yes.
Okay. All right. That's the Rishi Dishy question. Next one is food, actually. We've become a great nation of food lovers. Some of these programs on the TV and stuff, and food from all over the world. And I'm being asked here, do you have any recollections of favourite meals when you were at home, when you were younger, that your mother and father might have prepared for you? Do you have any things that you can share with us that we might go out and try ourselves, I guess?
Yeah, well, I guess it's probably hard. I mean, the two things that I have very strong childhood recollections of, my mum My mum has a very specific chicken curry dish that she always made for us. I don't know where the recipe for that exists because I've just written it down from her. And also a kind of Indian paranthas, which we would have for breakfast, which I definitely can't make. But that's what we used to do sometimes at the weekends. And my dad, because you mentioned him as well, so we should make it equal. To be credit to him, he is a master of the barbecue. Which I am a big fan of as well. So that is my major recollection, which is not even a childhood recollection because we still do that now all the time. So he's a master of the barbecue. So those are the probably different food recollections from both of them.
Right. Okay. We'll have to get that recipe for that curry. I think it sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, and the best barbecue meats actually from my local butcher in North Yorkshire, in North Allerton. We have two of them. We get these amazing minted lamb steaks from Thompson's on one side of the high street, and from Kitson's on the other side, we get the best lamb burgers in town. Which pretty much anyone who's ever visited our home and had a barbecue in North Yorkshire has probably experienced those bits of food. I must say.
Well, I'll look forward to the invite. Sounds very nice. Okay. Right. Slightly more serious question, an interesting personal question here. What do you hope that your children learn from you?
Oh gosh, that's quite a big question, right? I mean, do you mean in life or kind of at the moment?
I think in life, yes, as a parent. So when they're grown up and you're proud of them, what do you hope they've learned from you as a father?
Well, I think, there's lots that you try and bring up your kids with, good values being the most important thing. I tell you what I learned from my parents, which was kind of ingrained on me. One was the importance of working hard. That was something that was really important to us. A second one was just having respect for everybody and treating everyone well. Now, my dad, as people know, was GP, and my mum ran local chemist. They were their life was serving people in our community, and they both had a really special way with everybody that left an impression on me. I think that was really important. And the last thing was about value for money. And that was something that I was raised with, and those are all things that I'd want my kids to make sure that they had those same values as well. Treating everyone really well, having a value for money, and working really hard. But look, I mean, my kids also now, they're a bit older, they're 9, 11, so they see a little bit of me in this job, and that they take away from that you've got to, in life, you got to fight for the things that you believe in. It's not always easy. But you've got to keep going, right? You've got to persevere. And when things get tough, you keep going. You've got to have the grit. You've got to have the resilience to get through those tough times, right? And they see me a bit doing that in this job, and hopefully they'll take that away as a good life lesson as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go a bit rapid fire now, just a few more, just to wrap up. So, what would be your go-to karaoke song? I'm being asked.
Gosh, I'm not the massive karaoke fan, but if pushed, I probably would say "Ice Ice Baby" by Vanilla Ice, where I can do the rap quite happily. So,
okay.
I mean, I thought we haven't got time. But yeah,
I thought you were going to say "I Will Survive." I thought you might.
That's okay. Right. Should be
another anthem,
daily theme song at the moment. Yes. No, I could.
Keep going. Right. Next one. Favorite moment in the House of Commons.
Oh God, probably my maiden speech, which is very special for every member of Parliament. The ones that are on will remember it, and it's quite nerve-wracking. But you're surrounded by some of your friends, which is really lovely, in what we affectionately call a donut, in the House of Commons. And yeah, I really enjoyed doing it. I mean, it's sort of, whatever public speaking you've done previously in life, it's hard to beat making a speech in the House of Commons for the first time. So that will be a very special moment for me. I think my video is probably somewhere online. God knows what it's like now, looking back at it. Probably the other favourite moment I had, actually, there was a day with COVID, and something had happened at my daughter's school, and then my wife was away. And I had to look after her for a bit while I was working, so she had to spend a kind of day with me at work, which was the only ever time that she's watched me do something in the House of Commons, my older daughter Krishna, and I happened to have Treasury orals where I was answering questions as Chancellor, and she got to come and watch me do that, which was quite sweet. So that was a nice moment, because that's the only other time that's happened.
That's very, very sweet. I have a memory, actually, of speaking in the Commons on the front bench, and my daughter came to see me. She's very young. She was about 7 or 8, so she sat up in the gallery, and I said, "I'll give you a secret little sign. I'll touch my thing, and when I do that, you've got to do the same." And we had that little moment of communication between us, which was really very, very special between a father and a child in those extraordinary circumstances. Next question: have you ever been starstruck by anybody?
Oh,
Ever
yes.
met anybody you thought?
Yeah, lots. Oh God, yeah. I
Right.
mean, hasn't it? Yeah. No, I think some of my searing childhood memories was I'm a big Atlanta Football Club fan and Saints fan, and there was a time after, I'm trying to think, was it after Francis Benali's kind of testimonial match, or was it something else? But I got to meet Matthew Letizia and Alan Shearer together. And obviously Matt Letizia is one of my childhood football idols. That was amazing. I thought I still got the picture somewhere. That was really cool. And then who else? Meeting David Beckham. I mean, that was another massive childhood hero of mine. But I recently met David Gower as well. That was extraordinary. I took a picture of that. That was great because I grew up in, he was played for Hampshire when I was younger at cricket. That was great. But then also, I got to say, probably the first time, this might sound a bit odd for someone in my job, but I was very starstruck when I first met Laura Kuenssberg, because she interviewed me as Chancellor for the first time, I think on my 40th birthday, and my team had to keep telling me, like, you know, stop being starstruck by her. But it was quite an amazing moment. And then the other day, I got interviewed by Andy Peters, who again I grew up watching him on the broom cupboard, and then there he was interviewing me years later. That was pretty neat. So yeah, lots of moments of being starstruck.
Okay, and this is the final question, and I doubt very much that the contest will hang on your answer to this one, but we have been asked, Beatles or the Rolling Stones?
Beatles.
The Beatles. Definitely. Okay. Any particular reason why the Beatles?
I just, you know, my dad went to university at Liverpool, and so there's a bit of that, and just I kind of grew up a bit more with their music. So yeah.
Okay, well, you've certainly done the long and winding road. Let's hope it leads to some satisfaction. Perhaps on that note, I should stick to the day job and not try and be a stand-up comic. But anyway, Rishi, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that if you've seen nothing else, you've seen somebody who has genuine ideas for our country, is passionate for our country, has a superb track record in facing some of the greatest crises our country has faced. And I think also, if I may say so without embarrassing you too much, Rishi, has the character, the honesty to tell it the way that it is, that there are no in one bound Jack was free solutions to all the problems that we face at the moment. It's going to take a lot of hard work, and we have to be realistic and honest with people about that. So Rishi, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and wish you luck for the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for your fantastic questions. We covered a lot of ground. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.